How's it going? My name is Matt, and today we're going to be going over an AWS Lambda Toolkit. So it's a node module that I developed to make AWS Lambda development go a little bit smoother. So AWS Lambdas are awesome and they're great. And not too long ago, we were doing quite a bit of experimental tech, and we were implementing these, and we found that the development process isn't super smooth. So you either have to use the web-based editor or you have to use your local, but then you have to bundle it all up, tag a new version onto it, and then push it up to AWS, which is great until you wind up with 40 different versions for one Lambda, which can get a little bit frustrating. And there's nothing wrong with the web editor except for it's more of a psychological thing, but some developers, myself included, we work really hard to get our local host ecosystems perfect, and we really enjoy them, and not using them just is kind of a bummer. Uh, you spend all this time getting all your environment set up just how you want it, and so you don't really want to work outside of it. So this tool kind of serves as a utility or a tool belt to help development go a little bit smoother. So it provides you with a test runner so you can test your lambdas locally, not having to modify the actual lambda code just so that it'll function outside of the AWS environment. And then it also provides you with a tool to automatically deploy, bundle up and deploy your lambda to AWS, which is awesome. It makes it really, 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 really simple. So let's get right into it. I've got a test lambda here that it has a database, which is just an array with an object in it with Joe Schmo. And so all this lambda does is it's going to get a user object, check if it's missing a name. If it is, we don't want it. We're going to fail. Checks for an email, doesn't have it, we fail. Checks to make sure that user doesn't already exist, and then if they don't, we succeed and we push that user into the database. Otherwise, we fail. What's going on? Figure it out. Why can't you get the correct data in? So nothing too special. I do want to point out though that even though this is going to be functioning and working locally, I don't have to have a different kind of structure than I would on AWS. So we're still starting off with exports.handler. We're passing in an event, which is going to be the data, and context, which we terminate the request or succeed based on the context. So, for example, I said if we're missing a name, we're supposed to fail. Context.fail, user's missing their name. Context.fail, user's missing their email. Down here, context.succeed, successfully added the user to the database. So nothing too fancy here. The only thing I do want to mention or bring attention to is this up here. Now we're not using any AWS SDK functionality inside of this test lambda. You totally can, and it will totally work locally, no problem at all. You can do some really dynamic stuff. However, when you do use it, just due to some limitations with trying to inject context and inject kind of like global configurations into your Lambda, you have to specify the AWS config region in your file. You don't have to on AWS. That is one compromise, but outside of that, it's going to be identical to just kind of running something in the AWS environment. And so that's the only gotcha. If that's a deal breaker, I'm sorry, working on a fix. So far, have not been able to come up with an elegant one that just works. So let's get down to it. Let's add some test data. So first off, let's show off the testing, where we're going to just have this little task.js file, and inside of that, I've got it set up so that if I run this with the deploy flag, it's going to run the deployment. If I run it with the test flag, it's going to run the test runner. The only difference here from this particular instance of this kind of tasks file and how you would do it if you were using this is I'm not going to be deploying to AWS because I don't want to show everybody my secret key and my access key. So I don't have those filled in here. And then to make everything work with that, I've had to modify the source of the module locally. So I'm going directly to that modified source rather than AWS Lambda Toolkit, requiring the AWS Lambda Toolkit from NPM, which you would get into your project by NPM install, save dev, AWS Lambda Toolkit. So other than that, identical to how you would use it for your own Lambdas. You'll notice that deploy, you pass in some properties. Test, I'm not passing in any. You can pass in test data into the method. However, it's not required. I suggest, I'll go into my suggestion here in a second, but deploy in this instance is the only thing we need to configure. And we're going to configure that with our secret key, access key, region, and Lambda name. That's all that's required. In the future, we're contemplating adding the ability to automatically create a Lambda on first deploy. There's just a lot of legwork that needs to go into it to make that happen. So that would require a lot more configuration locally, and it would require memorizing all the properties and stuff that are required to make it work, which to me is not the best configuration experience. I'd rather just do that on the AWS web interface and then toss my secret key, my access key, and my Lambda name into this deployment configuration and call it a day. But that is potentially in the pipeline for later on. So we're going to go ahead and start off by adding some test data. Let's show off the test runner. So I recommend that you do this via the package.json file. And the way we do that is we're just going to add a property to it called lambda tests. That's just going to be an object. And inside of that object, we're going to assign key value pairs for different tests. So our key is going to be just kind of like a general descriptor of that test. And the value is going to be the file that corresponds, the file that contains the JSON data that corresponds with that kind of generic descriptor. So first off, let's add a success one. And we're going to create a directory called test data, success.json. And that's all there is to it. So if we create a folder, test data, and create a little fancy object in here, user object, and we want this to succeed, so we're going to provide a name, Bob Saget, that looks good, and an email, bob@thesagman.org. That sounds like something he would have. We're going to go ahead and save that inside of our test data as success.json, just like we listed in the package.json file. And that's it. That's all there is to it. So all that really is required for you to run tests is a entry inside your package.json file and a JSON file. So pretty straightforward. Let's hop on over to the handy dandy command line, and we'll go ahead and test this out. So I've got npm test kind of aliased to run the test task. So npm test, and let's see what happens. Perfect. So as you can see, it ran our test. It showed us the data that's being used. It mentions that it received the request, that we've successfully added the user to the database. There was nothing wrong with that data, so that's exactly what we were expecting. We've got a 200. We're good to go. After it finishes running your test, it's going to terminate the server that it span up, and it's going to shut it down. And that's all there is to it. So basically how this works is whenever you run a test, it's spinning up a node-based server using your Lambda as the kind of like data handler, piping in that context information, and running it. So the information that is received is then just piped straight back to you, so you can verify that things are working as you expect them to, which is nice. It's really nice being able to just kind of like, okay, I know I'm going to have this data. Let's make sure that it's receiving it correctly, and just being able to run that without having to modify everything just to get it, just to like run it in a sandbox just to make sure that your for loop is working. So that's awesome. But let's see something other than a success. Stuff happens, and let's make a stuff happen scenario. So for this one, let's pretend that Mr. Bob did not provide, well, something happened to Bob's email on the way through the pipeline to this Lambda. So we got his name, we did not get his email. So we're going to save this one as fail missing email.json. That's all there is to that. Let's go ahead and add it as an entry in our package.json file. Fail missing email test data / fail missing email.json. And good to go. Let's go ahead and, I did not show you guys what I just did, but so fail missing email, I added that as an entry to the Lambda test object, and then I added a fail missing email JSON file, and inside of that I've got just user or user name. I don't have user email. So according to my Lambda, this is going to fail. So let's go ahead and verify that that happens. Run the test again. And you'll notice that it ran both tests. So all tests you have listed there, it's going to run from top to bottom. So another kind of interesting little caveat is the server remains the same every time this happens. So if you wanted to, you might want to handle this a little bit differently. But if you wanted to include the same data, for example, it's supposed to fail if there is an existing user. If you don't do anything in your Lambda that removes that user again or something like that, you can actually pipe the same information in and verify that the same user going in twice is going to fail the second time, but not the first time. So back to this, we've got our success. We already know that. And right here, after that, we've got running test, fail, missing email, receive the request. We can see that there's a suspicious omission of his email. And 500, request failed. Users missed their email. Now figure it out, pipeline thing. And again, after it finishes, goes ahead and terminates that server and shuts it down, and you're free to do other things again. So really simple, really easy to add tests. Something that really speeds up the development of these Lambdas. In my view, in my experience, it's just really easy to be able to fire these off and verify data is going to work right, on the spot. So now that we know that it's working, let's go ahead and I can show you the deployment, or not the deployment, but the bundling. So we don't need to change anything here. I don't have this set up as an alias, but in my task.js, you'll remember if you fire it off with the deploy flag, it's going to run the deployment. So node task.js deploy. And there we go. Easy as that. My code, if it was hooked up, would be deployed to AWS. So what's happening here is it first runs an NPM install to verify that all of your node modules are installed and available, and then it generates a list of NPM modules to ignore. So if you have dev dependencies, for example, the AWS Lambda Toolkit, if you install that npm install -save dev AWS Lambda Toolkit, it's going to save that as a dev dependency. We don't really want dev dependencies in production. They don't hurt, but we don't really want them. So it's going to go through all of your dev dependencies, ignore anything listed, and bundle up everything else into a zip file so it can be deployed up to AWS with no problems. So if I LA right there, I can see we've got a shiny new zip file inside of our directory. And if I unzip it, I apologize for my cat. If I unzip it, we'll see we've got all of our data in here ready to go. So if this were to be deployed, everything that is required would have been deployed to AWS. And as I mentioned before, any NPM modules that are actual dependencies, those will be included, but development dependencies will not be included. So it's nothing, that's not like too much of a savings, but it does help in the upload because if you've ever tried to move a node modules folder around, you will know it is a giant beast half the time because every module has dependencies which have dependencies which have dependencies. So it kind of just speeds up the process and it keeps bloat to a minimum. But that's it. As far as the toolkit goes, that's all there is to it. So quick recap, you can quickly test your Lambda locally without having to deploy it with JSON files. And then when you're done, you're ready, you think this Lambda is the best Lambda I've ever seen, it is ready for the prime time, you can quickly bundle it up and deploy it to AWS. And that's it. The entire node module is going to be, I'm going to include the link to the node module as well as the GitHub for it in the description here. Super simple to install and implement. And if you've got changes if there's something you'd like to see added to it, feel free. The repo is public, so have at it. Go ahead and submit pull requests all you want, and let's make it even cooler than it already is. So hope that this provides some use to you. Hope it helps out with your AWS Lambda development, and yeah, that's it. Stay tuned for some new developments on this. I know I just pushed something up to it this morning, a new update, but I've got a couple other updates that are going to be on the way, and we've got some interesting things kind of like in the pipeline, such as like pre-deployment hooks and stuff like that. So keep your eyes peeled, and yeah, hope you have a good rest of the day.